So, if somebody were to ask you what you picture when you think of the state of Michigan, well, if you're anything like me, you might think of the city of Detroit, you might think of the city of Flint, you might think of the Great Lakes and the beaches that go with them. But how about waterfalls? It turns out the Upper Peninsula of Michigan is just full of waterfalls. Like, even a conservative estimate says there are more than 200 of them up here. So earlier this month, I took a chill solo afternoon drive to try and go see 3 of those waterfalls in an afternoon. 3 that I just kind of randomly picked off a list. And much to my delight, when I got home and started trying to learn more about these falls, I discovered that if you put all 3 of them together, these 3 waterfalls that, again, I randomly picked off a list, they tell a story. Specifically, they tell the story of why the Western Upper Peninsula in particular has so many waterfalls to begin with. So let's go on an adventure. Along the way, we will see evidence of a gigantic ancient lava flow, a place where there is literally a giant crack in the Earth's crust. And of course, we'll learn how you get a waterfall in the first place. I'm gonna send you back a few weeks to when I first went on this adventure, and then every now and then, we'll pop back to my living room and I'll share more of what I've learned since then. Let's do it. Hello! It is a beautiful spring afternoon here. It is sunny, it is kind of warm, and the snow is mostly melted. So today, I'm going on a waterfall adventure. I didn't grow up in a place with waterfalls, but I've been told that spring is a great time to see them just because so much snow has melted and just dumped a bunch of water into the rivers. Today, I'm gonna try and see no fewer than 3 waterfalls. I'm gonna try and go to Eagle River Falls, Jacobs Falls, and Haven Falls, all of which are in Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula, which is just way up there. And I don't really know what to expect. I don't know if they're gonna be super cool. I don't know if they're gonna be completely dried up, but one thing I do know is that there are some fascinating geology stories here. This is me taking a pit stop, partly because I'm slightly obsessed with these kind of cliffs. Like, I used to think Michigan was flat, but also these cliffs actually have a surprising amount to do with our waterfall adventure today. So this cliff is mostly volcanic rock, and that has a lot to do with why there are just so many waterfalls in this area. Okay, so I actually had no idea how interesting those cliffs truly are. It turns out that is part of what is possibly the largest single lava flow on the planet. So I think I'm just gonna make a separate video about that sometime. But the point that I was trying to get at there is that the Western Upper Peninsula in particular has experienced just a ton of volcanic activity. About 1.1 billion years ago, there was this major event called the Midcontinent Rift, where for some reason or another, the Earth's crust literally started to pull apart. That led to an inconceivable amount of lava, and if you're interested in learning more about the rift specifically, I'll stick a card to it at the end of this video. But the key detail for this story is that as all that lava cooled and hardened, it created volcanic rock like basalt. Specifically, it created a big rock layer geologists call the Portage Lake Volcanics. Over long periods of time, a lot of that volcanic rock got buried by other kinds of rock like sandstone, but that definitely doesn't mean it's gone. And that brings us to our first waterfall of this adventure. Hello! Okay, we've arrived at Eagle River Falls. There are several other people here, so I'm gonna put my mask on and probably won't take a ton of talking videos at the falls, so please enjoy some more voiceover. Around the time I was in middle school, I learned that waterfalls form through erosion, when water comes along and wears away some kind of rock. But then I started researching this video, and literally the first thing that I learned was that waterfalls can form all kinds of ways. Anything from glacial activity to big faults or cracks in the Earth's crust can do it, and that's something we'll get into more when we go to Haven Falls. But here, Eagle River Falls did at least partly form through that classic way you might have also learned about in middle school, which is through erosion, although glaciers did definitely help. This rock at the top of the falls here is that Portage Lake Volcanics layer, which is pretty hard, tough rock. and the rock at the bottom of the falls is part of the Copper Harbor Formation, or the Copper Harbor Conglomerate, depending on which source you're looking at. Conglomerate is just a bunch of kind of round-ish rocks cemented together. Here, it's a mix of pieces of lava rock and also sediments and sedimentary rock carried down from the nearby mountains. Over time, as glaciers from the past scraped over this land and this river flowed toward Lake Superior, it wore away the softer conglomerate and left behind this big old cliff of volcanic rock. Now, geology-wise though, erosion and glacial activity are definitely not the only things that made waterfalls in the Keweenaw Peninsula. Honestly, I'm not even sure they're the most interesting. Of the 3 waterfalls I visited on that day, my favorite story is probably the one behind Haven Falls, but we'll get to that in a second.
Okay, so that was absolutely stunning and exceeded all of my expectations. The next waterfall on the list is Jacobs Falls. It's about 3 or 4 miles from here. It is a smaller waterfall, just gonna prep you with that, but hopefully that also means there will be fewer people there. So, let's go!
So I couldn't really find much on the geology of Jacobs Falls. I can tell you that it's another waterfall flowing over the Portage Lake Volcanics, and I can also tell you that there's a pretty cool hiking trail behind it, but that's about it. Still, I wanted to include it here just because it's so quaint and lovely and easy to get to, and I highly recommend a quick stop if you're ever in the area.
Man, I'm staring in my side view mirror right now, and you can just see this waterfall just chugging along right there, right off the side of the road. So this last waterfall I want to see is called Haven Falls. It is on the east side of the Keweenaw Peninsula. We're on the west side right now, so it'll be a little bit of a drive, but let's go see what there is to see. One more.
Okay, so I mentioned there are other ways waterfalls have formed in this area, and a big one is through faults. A fault is a break in the Earth's crust where 2 pieces of rock have moved past each other somehow. It could mean they slid past each other horizontally, or that one piece of rock got shifted above the other, or something in between. If you're familiar with faults already, it might be in the context of earthquakes, since a lot of earthquake activity happens along faults. And much to my surprise, it turns out the Keweenaw Peninsula also has a gigantic fault. Appropriately, it's called the Keweenaw Fault, and it cuts basically right down the middle of the peninsula. This fault in particular is called a thrust fault, which means it's a place where one block of rock got, well, thrust above another one, and they're pretty common in areas of compression. Now, if you're wondering exactly how the activity on this fault happens, me too. I read a couple of papers and research summaries about this, but based on other things I know about the area, I have a suspicion that those hypotheses are outdated, so I haven't included them here. That said, there are a couple of things we do know about this fault. One is that it's not active. There's really not activity happening on this fault, so there is no risk of a major earthquake in this area. And the other thing we know about this fault is that it happens to run right through Haven Falls.
Hello! We've arrived at Haven Falls. It took me a while to find it. If you ever try to go here, Google does not quite know where it is. Just go a little bit farther down the road. And I'm just looking at it from my car. It's right there. It's bigger than Jacobs Falls, and okay, let's just get out of the car.
Okay, so if at this point you're looking for like a dramatic sheer cliff or a deep abyss in the earth, I can clarify a couple of things based on what I learned. So one thing I learned is that all the main activity on the Keweenaw Fault happened like millions of years ago. So a lot has happened since then. Parts of the fault are buried, other rocks are eroded. It's been a long time. Another thing that really cleared things up for me is that I watched this truly excellent video by a local geologist, which I will link to in the description, where he pointed out that although we map and model faults as straight lines, they're actually more like gradients. So while I was filming these clips, I was basically standing on the Keweenaw Fault. Haven Falls is another place where the water flows over the Portage Lake Volcanics, but what strikes me about it is that the falls don't exist just because the river eroded some rock or because there were glaciers here. It's also a direct consequence of the Earth's crust just
physically shifting around. It's the same feeling I got when I lived in Washington, D.C. for a summer and just wandered around these historic places and could really think about the significant events that had happened there. It's just that here, the significant event was millions and millions and millions of years ago and involved big pieces of rock. And that brings me to something I really loved about filming this video. I set out on that Saturday afternoon to just go see 3 waterfalls because I wanted to explore and see some beautiful things. But then along the way, I ended up learning a story. I learned how a huge amount of lava a billion years ago created this tough, durable Portage Lake volcanics layer. And then over time, as other rock around that layer got eroded, it gave us Eagle River Falls and Jacobs Falls. And as that rock layer got physically thrust around, it gave us Haven Falls. The waterfalls are absolutely beautiful in the spring, and if I knew none of that, it still would have been worth going. But it was also just super fun for me to be able to put the falls in context and learn the story of how they got there in the first place. If you like this sort of thing, I've got more videos from Michigan's Upper Peninsula coming this spring and summer, and you can subscribe if you'd like to follow along. For now though, thanks for joining. I hope this was a cool chance to explore and adventure for you. I hope you learned something cool, and I'll see you next time.